Envision this scenario. You are a youthful bride called Margot, scarcely having endured 15 winters, positioned at the threshold of a stone dwelling in 1347 AD. While your recent spouse, Henrik, nears the nuptial couch, the straw matting under your unshod feet snaps with every apprehensive stride. The flame of tapers wavers over his seasoned countenance. He is almost double your years, picked by your patriarch for his trio of hogs and a half-acre of grain fields. Your palms quiver as you grip the sturdy woolen tunic crafted by your mother for this precise evening, the identical one she adorned, and her antecedent likewise. Across the fragile partitions, you detect his comrades externally, intoxicated by mead, bellowing coarse incitements, and striking cauldrons with ladles of wood. They refuse departure until auditory confirmation of the union's fulfillment. Your inhalations arrive in abrupt bursts as Henrik's hardened digits extend toward the hide lace at your collar, and you ponder if your mother's murmured advisories regarding matrimonial responsibilities might sufficiently ready you for the impending occurrences in this narrow, fume-filled space that reeks of moist fleece and unbathed physiques. This tale lacks amorous elements. It embodies the actuality of medieval closeness, a domain influenced by folklore, spiritual apprehension, and innate urges for persistence that would appear entirely alien to our contemporary grasp of courtship and yearning. Before immersing into these overlooked narratives of endurance and affliction, should you relish discovering history's veiled verities, please activate the endorsement icon and enlist for further materials akin to this. Additionally, contribute in the remarks area to disclose your point of audition. It is astonishing that we are collectively examining these archaic accounts from varied corners of the globe, linked through eras and expanses by our common fascination with bygone times. The medieval resting chamber functioned as a combat zone where forms turned into geopolitical realms, where ecclesiastical principles collided with ancestral rites, and where the most secluded instances of existence were dictated by ordinances so odd and limiting that they would provoke unease in a modern individual's dermis. These extended beyond private selections. They encompassed affairs of everlasting deliverance, familial dignity, and veritable existence or demise. Allow me to guide you back to Margot's realm, where the idea of marital violation was non-existent since consorts were assets, where cyclical blood was deemed so perilous it might devastate yields, and where an erroneous carnal stance could eternally doom your essence to the abyss. Within medieval Europe, the spousal sleeping area was never authentically solitary. The populace, the religious establishment, and primordial myths all possessed an interest in the occurrences between mates. As Margot united with Henrik during that harvest season of 1347 AD, their bond was not commemorated with sparkling wine and merriment. It constituted a commercial pact finalized with somatic secretions, attested by adjacent folk who held authority to require substantiation of completion. The matrimonial evening ceremony initiated far prior to the duo's contact. Initially, the placement ritual unfolded, where celebrants would physically convey the newlyweds to their quarters, disrobe them amid lewd melodies, and then position themselves beyond the portal to heed the noises that would validate the alliance's legal validity. Henrik's allies would not disperse until detecting Margot's utterances of discomfort, indication that her virginal seal had been breached and the bond sealed. However, this is where medieval closeness becomes profoundly unusual. The religious body instructed that even bonded pairs could enact deadly offenses in their personal beds. St. Jerome, composing in the 4th century AD, asserted that a male who cherishes his wife excessively ardently is a betrayer. The religious forebears held that overabundant delight, even in wedlock, corrupted the spirit. This transcended mere doctrinal speculation. It molded each element of medieval erotic conduct. Thomas Aquinas, the prominent medieval scholar, outlined definitive protocols for wedded individuals in his Summa Theologica near 1265 AD. Erotic engagement was permissible solely on specific weekdays, throughout particular intervals, and in a singular arrangement. Male above, female below, oriented toward one another. Any variation was regarded as contrary to essence and thus wicked. Mouth-based intimacy was banned completely, as were acts during bleeding cycles, expectancy, or lactation. The religious entity estimated that adherence to these edicts would restrict bonded pairs to intimacy on approximately 50 days yearly. Margot would have acquired these directives from her mother, who obtained them from the Hamlet cleric amid penance. The burden of perpetual condemnation loomed over every confidential exchange. When Henrik advanced toward her on a restricted Tuesday amid the fasting period, she encountered an untenable decision: comply with her mate's desire and jeopardize her immortality, or reject and confront his ire in an environment where spousal aggression was not merely lawful but anticipated. The medieval comprehension of feminine eroticism was constructed upon core misconceptions that lingered for generations. Health manuscripts from the time, shaped by antique Hellenic and Latin origins, professed that females were basically imperfect males. Their reproductive apparatuses were merely reversed editions of masculine genitals. The birth passage was seen as an inverted male organ, and the egg-producing glands as inner orbs. This was not simple unawareness. It was systematized health wisdom imparted in learning centers across the continent. These convictions bore significant ramifications for how medieval individuals perceived female craving and fulfillment. The healer Constantine the African, authoring in the 11th century AD, alleged that women underwent erotic delight dissimilarly from males. They demanded extended arousal and repeated culminations to engender life. This fostered the odd health conviction that forced intimacy could not yield gestation, since the female could not attain the essential delight. If a female conceived following assault, medieval tribunals frequently interpreted it as proof that she had relished the ordeal and thus bore partial culpability. Margot's mother could have cautioned her regarding the roving womb, a malady medieval healers thought could provoke hysteria, insanity, and even fatality. They supposed the uterus could physically traverse within a woman's frame, ascending to constrict her core or descending to depart via her passage. Cures involved aerating the passage with agreeable odors to attract the organ back to position, or imposing noxious scents to the nostrils to repel it lower. The medieval era adopted a multifaceted network of reproductive convictions from heathen legacies that the religious body never fully extinguished. Community sages, frequently labeled as enchantresses by subsequent eras, upheld a subterranean repository of botanicals, ceremonies, and methods aimed at promoting inception, averting gestation, or guaranteeing the arrival of sons. In the woodlands bordering Margot's settlement, females would assemble particular flora beneath the lunar fullness. Pennyroyal and tansy were steeped into infusions that could hinder gestation, although the boundary between prevention and lethality was alarmingly narrow. Mandrake root, formed like a person, was thought to augment reproductive capacity when born as a charm upon the flesh. The root held such worth that counterfeit variants carved from bryony proliferated in medieval emporiums. The religious body formally denounced these methods as sorcery, yet even faithful adherents could not wholly forsake them. The demarcation between traditional remedy and enchantment was indistinctly vague. A female might beseech Saint Margaret for secure birthing, while concurrently entombing a fragment of placental residue beneath her entryway to secure forthcoming fecundity. She might bear a sacred emblem to worship while concealing a shard of resin between her bosom to thwart spontaneous loss. Medieval prevention was a hazardous amalgamation of myth, toxin, and urgency. Women were instructed to leap backward sevenfold following union to obstruct inception or to ingest fermented grape with crushed insects. More lethal were the concoctions formulated from mercury, lead, and other poisonous materials that frequently eradicated the woman alongside any prospective offspring. The repercussions of undesired gestation were harsh. In a realm devoid of dependable safeguards, females confronted the perpetual hazard of perishing in labor. Maternal demise frequencies were overwhelming, with 1 in 3 females succumbing during or soon after parturition. For unattached females, gestation commonly signified societal ruin, banishment, or demise. The act of newborn disposal, while formally censured, was broadly acknowledged as a frantic female's ultimate recourse. Medieval union discussions were executed akin to armed maneuvers with physiques as the chief combat field. When Margot's father orchestrated her union to Henrik, her purity was essentially her endowment, more precious than any currency or beasts he could proffer. The virginal barrier became a medium of dignity, bartered among lineages as evidence of their offspring's chastity and their own esteem. The inaugural night transcended mere fulfillment. It concerned communal authentication of the bride's innocence. The stained bedclothes would be exhibited to the gathered assembly as confirmation that the union was valid. If no crimson emerged, the bride might be repatriated to her kin in ignominy, marked as defiled or even executed for deception. The strain on juvenile brides was immense. Some would covertly lacerate their digits or conceal avian blood to fabricate the proof their novel kin insisted upon. But medieval health's grasp of purity was grievously erroneous. They thought the barrier was a rigid film that fully obstructed the entry rather than the incomplete, adaptable structure it truly is. They considered its lack as definitive evidence of prior activity, when indeed it can rupture via equine travel, strenuous exertion, or mere innate differences in form. The religious body's principle of fulfillment generated its own unusual customs. A union was not deemed legally enforceable until erotic union had transpired, which implied that verifying or refuting fulfillment became a subject of judicial examination. Religious tribunals would assess both partners, questioning them individually about confidential particulars of their inaugural night. They would examine the female's form for indications of entry and interrogate locals about what they had overheard through the barriers. Medieval erotic arrangements were rigorously controlled by religious principle, but the truth was considerably more intricate. The dominant male stance was not merely favored. It was the sole arrangement that would not condemn your essence to the inferno. The religious body instructed that any arrangement placing the female superior was contrary to essence, since it infringed the innate hierarchy of masculine supremacy. Posterior access was viewed as animalistic, associating human eroticism with beastly pairing habits. Yet medieval writings suggest a more nuanced actuality. The fabliaux, ribald humorous stories prevalent in medieval France, portray erotic meetings that would have outraged the religious overseers. These narratives, frequently recounted by wandering bards in inns and plazas, disclose a concealed domain where pairs ventured into prohibited methods despite the peril of perpetual condemnation. The Gallic versifier Andreas Capellanus, composing around 1184 AD, depicted intricate wooing ceremonies that encompassed precise directives for erotic arrangements and methods. His composition implies that at minimum among the aristocracy, there existed a refined comprehension of erotic fulfillment that far surpassed the religious body's confining doctrines. Nevertheless, these methods were perilous confidences. Exposure could signify expulsion from the faith, displacement, or fatality. Medieval individuals existed in dread of erotic fiends that were thought to target humans during their most exposed instances. The female demon and male demon were not simply tales. They were recognized health and doctrinal realities. Religious overseers taught that these entities could assume human guise to entice males and females, pilfering their vital energy through erotic union. Medieval scholars formulated detailed hypotheses about how these fiends functioned. They held that a fiend could initially adopt female guise to gather male essence from a male, then metamorphose into male guise to inseminate a female with the pilfered essence. Any progeny from such a bond was thought to be afflicted or fiendish. The male demon presented an even larger menace to medieval females. These masculine fiends were said to possess physical might exceeding humans and able to subdue their targets. Females who describe erotic visions or encounters they could not clarify were often charged with associating with fiends. The boundary between target and enchantress was frighteningly slender. Rest paralysis, now comprehended as a brain event, was construed as fiendish erotic aggression. Males and females who awoke incapable of motion, frequently with a feeling of weight on their torso, were believed to be undergoing fiendish assault. The religious body recommended intricate rites of banishment and cleansing, but numerous suspected targets were incinerated as enchantresses in lieu. The medieval grasp of cyclical bleeding was anchored in horror and myth that would endure for ages. Cyclical blood was thought to be venom, so poisonous that it could slay flora, curdle vintage, and induce males to forfeit their potency. The Latin scholar Pliny the Elder, whose texts were still examined in medieval academies, alleged that cyclical blood could madden hounds and dull blades. Females during their lunar phases were regarded as hazardous contaminants who must be segregated from ordinary society. They could not access sacred places, handle sustenance, or contact holy items. In numerous settlements, bleeding females were obligated to reside in designated shelters beyond the group until their flow ceased. The religious body taught that cyclical bleeding was the Almighty's retribution for the first female's primal transgression, rendering each monthly occurrence a prompt of feminine disgrace. The absence of comprehension about cyclical bleeding produced odd health methods. Healers thought that cyclical blood not adequately discharged from the frame would build up and poison the female internally. They recommended blood release, cleansing, and other risky therapies to harmonize the feminine essences. Certain physicians suggested erotic union as a remedy for cyclical disorders, holding that masculine essence could counteract the venomous impacts of cyclical blood. Medieval females cultivated their own confidential wisdom about handling their phases. They employed moss, fabric scraps, and ovine hides as rudimentary cyclical safeguards. They monitored their phases via moon stages and formulated botanical cures to alleviate spasms and normalize their discharge. This wisdom was transmitted across female lineages, meticulously concealed from masculine healers and religious overseers who might denounce it as sorcery. The medieval era witnessed the emergence of detailed hypotheses about erotic harmony based on celestial symbols, bodily essences, and corporeal traits. Medieval healers held that erotic fulfillment and reproductive ability hinged on the appropriate equilibrium of warm and chill, moist and arid essences in both companions. A warm spouse might be mismatched with a chill consort, resulting in erotic malfunction and sterility. Corporeal assessment of prospective mates was usual among affluent lineages. Healers would inspect the bride's form for indicators of her erotic disposition. Broad pelvises signaled reproductive potential, while slender ones implied infertility. The groom's male organ dimensions and contour were evaluated for harmony with his planned consort. These assessments were performed with the same objective detachment utilized for inspecting beasts. The religious overseers formulated their own hypotheses about erotic harmony grounded in ethereal rather than corporeal traits. They instructed that pairs too intimately connected either by lineage or ethereal kinship would be afflicted with erotic malfunction and deformed progeny. The intricate regulations of blood relation implied that numerous medieval unions were subsequently voided when formerly unknown kin ties were uncovered. Medieval eroticism was profoundly interwoven with notions of dignity, disgrace, and societal position. A male's erotic skill was directly tied to his standing as a fighter and guide. Inability was not merely a personal shortcoming. It was a communal embarrassment that could ruin a male's position in his group. The medieval Gallic created intricate substitutes for erotic malfunction, generating a lexicon of disgrace that infiltrated every facet of societal exchange. For females, erotic repute was even more delicate. The merest suggestion of misconduct could demolish a female's union opportunities and her lineage's dignity. Medieval communities were compact societies where all were aware of others' affairs. A female observed conversing with a male, not her spouse or kin, could be labeled as unchaste. The criteria for female conduct were so confining that even wedded females existed in perpetual dread of rumor and charge. The medieval judicial framework mirrored these erotic concerns in its handling of violation, betrayal, and erotic aggression. Violation was characterized not as an offense against the female, but as an offense against the male who possessed her, her patriarch, spouse, or overlord. The penalty for violation fluctuated dramatically based on the societal rank of both the target and the offender. An aristocrat who violated a rustic female might incur a minor penalty, while a rustic who violated an aristocratic female would confront torment and fatality. Betrayal was penalized even more stringently, but solely for females. A wedded female who engaged erotically with any male besides her spouse could be slain by her spouse without judicial repercussions. Medieval legal texts explicitly awarded spouses the authority to slay unfaithful consorts and their paramours if discovered in the deed. Males, however, were typically at liberty to engage erotically with unattached females, courtesans, or their own attendants without judicial repercussions. The medieval era observed the evolution of intricate wooing ceremonies that would impact continental culture for generations. The custom of refined affection, popularized in the verses of the troubadours, established an alternate realm where erotic craving was raised to ethereal pursuit. These sentimental ideals were mainly a written illusion savored by the elite, but they exerted deep effects on how medieval individuals comprehended the connection between affection and eroticism. The refined affection custom taught that genuine affection could solely exist external to wedlock. A warrior's loyalty to his dame was intended to stay perpetually unrealized, persisting in a condition of perpetual longing that cleansed the spirit through anguish. This generated an odd division between spousal eroticism, which was purely utilitarian, and sentimental affection, which was purely ethereal. The actuality of medieval wooing was far more practical. Among the rustics, youths might possess some selection in union companions, but financial factors always prevailed over individual inclination. A settlement lass might prefer the forge worker's offspring, but if the grinder proffered superior conditions to her patriarch, she would discover herself bonded to a male she scarcely recognized. Medieval betrothal methods encompass ceremonies designed to evaluate the harmony of prospective mates. In certain areas, betrothed pairs were permitted to rest together attired, divided by a timber plank termed a separation board. This method enabled lineages to appraise whether the pair was physically harmonious without endangering gestation or breaching religious principle about pre-union eroticism. The medieval era inherited a multifaceted legacy of erotic enchantment and reproductive ceremonies from prior heathen societies. These methods were suppressed by Christian oppression, but never completely vanished. Medieval rustics persisted in enacting ancient reproductive ceremonies, often masked as Christian festivities or integrated into traditional remedy. The observance of May commencement preserved robust erotic connotations despite religious efforts to quell it. Youths would pass the evening in the woodland, purportedly collecting blossoms and limbs to adorn the settlement. In truth, May commencement was a chance for erotic exploration and wooing beyond the customary constraints of settlement existence. Numerous gestations were estimated to stem from May commencement meetings, causing a rise in winter births. Union festivities incorporated myriad reproductive ceremonies intended to guarantee the pair's procreative triumph. The bride might be doused with seeds or fruits to promote gestation. The union bed would be sanctified with blessed liquid, but also covertly equipped with botanicals and talismans thought to amplify reproductive ability. These methods symbolized a frantic effort to regulate reproduction in a realm where newborn demise was catastrophic and lineage persistence relied on generating robust offspring. The medieval comprehension of inception was an odd fusion of Aristotelian thought, Christian principle, and traditional insight. Medieval healers held that both males and females generated essence that merged during union to form new existence. They instructed that female peak was essential for inception, resulting in the sorrowful conviction that females who conceived after violation must have savored the ordeal. Medieval individuals formulated intricate hypotheses about how to affect the gender of unborn progeny. They held that inception during specific lunar stages would yield male progeny, while others would produce females. The alignment of celestial bodies at the instant of inception was thought to affect not only the progeny's gender, but also its character and forthcoming opportunities. The medieval era witnessed the evolution of progressively refined techniques of erotic regulation and oversight. The religious body created webs of reporters who disclosed on the confidential existences of their neighbors. Penance became an instrument for collecting confidential particulars about erotic methods, with clerics interrogating confessors about their most secluded instances. The ascent of the investigative body in the 13th century AD introduced novel degrees of erotic oppression. Suspected dissenters were coerced into admitting not solely their spiritual convictions, but also their erotic methods. The questioning guides employed by investigators encompassed detailed inquiries about erotic arrangements, frequency of union, and even the bodily feelings experienced during eroticism. Medieval confinements incorporated special penalties for erotic offenses. Females convicted of betrayal might be enclosed in enclosures so confined they could not upright themselves, nourished only on loaves and liquid until they perished of hunger. Males convicted of violation might be publicly emasculated prior to suspension. These severe penalties were crafted not merely to chastise the culpable, but to intimidate the whole group into erotic adherence. The medieval era generated an extensive body of erotic counsel and guidance, though most was concealed from common folk. Health texts encompassed detailed portrayals of erotic arrangements and methods, but these were accessible only to learned healers and affluent sponsors. The typical medieval individual learned about eroticism through hushed dialogues, traditional melodies, and the harsh lesson of experimentation. The religious body produced its own erotic writings, but it was chiefly focused on listing transgressions rather than offering affirmative direction. Penance guides cataloged hundreds of erotic methods with their matching penalties. These texts disclose an obsession with erotic detail that opposes the religious body's formal stance on abstinence and sanctity. Medieval union guides composed for affluent sponsors offer insights into the erotic existences of the elite. These texts provided counsel on everything from inaugural night methods to handling erotic connections during gestation. They disclose a refined comprehension of erotic fulfillment that was shielded from the broad populace, but evidently enacted by those who could secure seclusion and judgment. The medieval era witnessed the evolution of progressively elaborate techniques of erotic penalty and regulation. The purity device, though likely less prevalent than popular narratives indicate, symbolizes the extreme actions some medieval individuals took to regulate feminine eroticism. These apparatuses were not merely physical constraints, but emblems of the horror that enveloped feminine erotic independence. Medieval pleasure houses were both authorized and prohibited concurrently. The religious body formally censured courtesanship, but worldly overseers often authorized and governed it. Medieval metropolises sustained official vice zones where courtesans operated under administrative supervision. These females were obligated to don unique attire, reside in assigned districts, and undergo routine health assessments. The medieval era generated some of the most unusual erotic traditions in continental history. The privilege of initial night or lord's right purportedly granted feudal overlords the authority to engage erotically with their rustic brides on their matrimonial evening. While scholars dispute whether this method truly existed, the sheer potential discloses the total erotic susceptibility of medieval rustic females. Medieval individuals held that erotic methods could affect everything from atmospheric conditions to the outcome of armed endeavors. Monarchs and elites consulted celestial interpreters about the optimal times for erotic union, holding that the universal energies present at inception would affect their progeny's fate. Military leaders might command their troops to refrain from eroticism before conflict, holding that erotic activity would deplete their combative strength. The medieval era witnessed the evolution of progressively refined techniques of erotic oversight and regulation. Settlement groups formulated intricate systems of societal coercion designed to govern erotic conduct. Youths were seldom permitted to be unaccompanied together, and bonded pairs were expected to perform their confidential existences according to group norms. The medieval comprehension of erotic fulfillment was deeply shaped by spiritual instructions about the essence of the spirit and the form. The religious body taught that erotic fulfillment was a snare laid by the adversary to divert humans from ethereal reflection. Even within wedlock, excessive relish of erotic union was regarded as a transgression that could doom the spirit to the inferno. Medieval individuals formulated elaborate methods for handling erotic craving and regulating their forms. Abstinence from food, chilled immersions, and bodily penance were utilized to suppress erotic impulses. Youths were instructed to evade circumstances that might lead to erotic stimulation, including specific sustenances, melodies, and types of amusement. The medieval era generated a vast subterranean culture of erotic violation and insurgency. Despite the religious body's attempts to regulate human eroticism, medieval individuals discovered ways to articulate their cravings and seek fulfillment. This obscured realm of erotic insurgency coexisted with the formal culture of suppression and regulation. Medieval eroticism was molded by practical factors that modern individuals seldom contemplate. The absence of seclusion in medieval abodes implied that erotic union frequently occurred in areas shared with offspring, attendants, and extended kin. The noises and odors of erotic activity were components of everyday existence in manners that would astonish modern perceptions. The medieval era witnessed the evolution of progressively complex connections between eroticism and societal rank. The erotic advantages of the elite were part of their wider pattern of societal dominance. Overlords and dames had access to private quarters, exotic sustenances, and idle time that permitted them to investigate erotic fulfillment in ways that were unattainable for rustics. Medieval wedlock was ultimately about persistence rather than affection or erotic contentment. In a realm where lifespan was brief and newborn demise was elevated, the primary objective of wedlock was to generate offspring who could perpetuate the lineage name and cultivate the terrain. Erotic fulfillment was a secondary factor at best and often viewed as a hazardous diversion from more vital issues. The medieval era generated some of the most confining erotic traditions in continental history, but it also witnessed the evolution of refined forms of erotic opposition and insurgency. Medieval individuals discovered ways to seek fulfillment and articulate their cravings despite the overpowering societal coercion to adhere to spiritual and societal anticipations. As we revert to Margot in her stone dwelling, Henrik's palms still extending toward her in the wavering taper glow, we can grasp her horror not merely as individual fear, but as the pressure of an entire society's erotic concerns bearing down upon her juvenile frame. She bears the load of spiritual principle, lineage dignity, group oversight, and her own frantic yearning for persistence in a realm that provides her no safeguard. The medieval era prompts us that human eroticism has perpetually been molded by authority, dread, and societal regulation. The unusual methods and convictions of medieval individuals appear foreign to us presently, but they arose from the identical core human requirements and cravings that propel erotic conduct in every age. Comprehending medieval eroticism aids us in identifying how our own erotic society mirrors the authority frameworks and societal concerns of our epoch. Medieval closeness was never genuinely close. It was perpetually communal, perpetually geopolitical, perpetually hazardous. The resting chamber was a combat zone where essences were secured and forfeited, where lineage dignity was safeguarded or ruined, where the most confidential instances of human existence were governed by ordinances that appeared crafted to eradicate fulfillment and maximize anguish. The medieval era generated some of the most confining erotic traditions in continental history. But it also discloses the remarkable durability of human erotic craving. Despite centuries of spiritual oppression, societal regulation, and judicial penalty, medieval individuals discovered ways to seek affection, fulfillment, and close linkage. Their narratives prompt us that eroticism is one of the most core aspects of human encounter, too potent to be entirely regulated by any framework of authority. The peculiar and frequently unsettling erotic methods of medieval Europe were not simply the outcome of unawareness or myth. They arose from an intricate interplay of spiritual principle, societal framework, financial necessity, and authentic human requirement. Comprehending these methods assists us in valuing both how far we have advanced and how many of the identical underlying conflicts continue to mold human eroticism today. In conclusion, the medieval era instructs us that eroticism is perpetually geopolitical, perpetually hazardous, and perpetually vital to human encounter. The unusual close methods of medieval individuals were their efforts to navigate these perpetual conflicts between craving and regulation, fulfillment and peril, affection and persistence. Their struggles prompt us that the pursuit for erotic liberty and genuine closeness is not a modern creation, but an archaic human ambition that surpasses any specific historical instant. The taper glow still wavers across Henrik's seasoned countenance as he extends toward youthful Margot. But now we comprehend that this instant encompasses the full pressure of medieval erotic society. The dread, the myth, the frantic hope for persistence, and the perpetual human yearning for linkage despite insurmountable challenges. In her quivering palms and his hardened digits, we observe not merely two individuals, but the clash of an entire civilization's erotic concerns and cravings enacted in the most close area conceivable. Yet never authentically solitary, never authentically secure, never authentically